3 o'clock in the morning. 3 o'clock in the morning. That's 3 a.m. to the layman. The moon-washed streets empty, the growl of a car picking up speed down a distant road. The revelers would be tucked away by now, paired off or alone in deep, beer-heavy sleep. Hassan, at his new lady's place. "Don't stay up," he had said with a wink. And now just the two of us to wait for the sunrise, me and Billie Holiday. Her voice warbling through the darkened room, reaching toward me like a lover. "I'm a fool to want you, such a fool to want you." It's 92, Chapter 5. Barack Obama, Dreams from My Father, a story of race and inheritance. I poured myself a drink and let my eyes skip across the room. Bowls of pretzel crumbs overflowing, ashtrays, empty bottles like a skyline against the wall. Great party, that's what everybody had said. Count on Barry and Hassan to rock the house. Everybody except Regina. Regina hadn't enjoyed herself. What was it that she had said before she left? "You always think it's about you." And then that stuff about her grandmother, like I was somehow responsible for the fate of the entire black race. As if it was me who had kept her grandma on her knees all her life. To hell with Regina. To hell with her high horse, holier than thou. You let me down. Look in her eyes. She didn't know me. She didn't understand where I was coming from. I fell back on the couch and lit a cigarette, watching the match burn down until it tickled my fingertips, then feeling the prick on the skin as I pinched the flame dead. "What's the trick?" the man asked. "The trick is not caring that it hurts." I tried to remember where I'd heard that line, but it was lost on me now like a forgotten face. The trick is not caring that it hurts. No matter. Billy knew the same trick. It was in that torn up, trembling voice of hers. And I had learned it too. That's what my last 2 years in high school had been about. After Ray went off to junior college somewhere and I had set the books aside, after I had stopped writing to my father, and he'd stopped writing back, I had grown tired of having to untangle a mess that wasn't of my making. I had learned not to care. I blew a few smoke rings, remembering those years. Pot had helped, and booze, maybe a little blow when you could afford it. Not smack, though. Mickey, my potential initiator, had been just a little too eager for me to go through with that. Said he could do it blindfolded, but he was shaking like a faulty engine when he said it. Maybe he was just cold. We were standing in a meat freezer in the back of the deli where he worked, and it couldn't have been more than 20 degrees in there. But he didn't look like he was shaking from the cold. Looked more like he was sweating, his face shiny and tight. He had pulled out the needle and the tubing, and I'd looked at him standing there surrounded by big slabs of salami and roast beef, and right then an image popped into my head of an air bubble, shiny and round like a pearl, rolling quietly through a vein and stopping my heart. Junkie, pothead, that's where I'd been headed, the final fatal role of the young would-be black man, except the highs hadn't been about that, me trying to prove what a down brother I was, not by then anyway. I got high for just the opposite effect, something that could push questions of who I was out of my mind, something that could flatten out the landscape of my heart, blur the edges of my memory. I had discovered that it didn't make any difference whether you smoked reefer in the white classmate's sparkling new van or in the dorm room of some brother you'd met down at the gym or on the beach with a couple of Hawaiian kids who had dropped out of school and now spent most of their time looking for an excuse to brawl. Nobody asked you whether your father was a fat cat executive who cheated on his wife or some laid-off Joe who slapped you around whenever he bothered to come home. You might just be bored or alone. Everybody was welcome into the club of disaffection, and if the high didn't solve whatever it was that was getting you down that could at least help you laugh at the world's ongoing folly and see through all the hypocrisy and bullshit and cheap moralism. That's how it had seemed to me then anyway. It had taken a couple of years before I saw how fates were beginning to play themselves out, the difference that color and money made after all, and who survived, how soft or hard the landing when you finally fell. Of course, either way, you needed some luck. That's what Pablo had lacked mostly, not having his driver's license that day. A cop with nothing better to do than to check the trunk of his car, or Bruce not finding his way back from too many bad acid trips and winding up on a funny farm. And winding up in a funny farm. Or Duke not walking away from the car wreck. I tried to explain some of this to my mother once, the role of luck in the world, the spin of the wheel. It was at the start of my senior year in high school. She was back in Hawaii, her field work completed, and one day she had marched into my room, wanted to know the details of Pablo's arrest. I had given her a reassuring smile and patted her hand and told her not to worry. I wouldn't do anything stupid. It was usually an effective tactic, another one of those tricks I had learned. People were satisfied so long as you were courteous and smiled and made no sudden moves. They were more than satisfied. They were relieved. Such a pleasant smile to find a well-mannered young black man who didn't seem angry all the time. Except my mother hadn't looked satisfied. She just sat there, studying my eyes, her face as grim as a hearse. "Don't you think you're being a little casual about your future?" she said. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean. One of your friends was just arrested for drug possession. Your grades are slipping. You haven't even started on your college applications. Whenever I try to talk to you about it, you act like I'm just this great big brother. I didn't need to hear all this. It wasn't like I was flunking out. I started to tell her I had been thinking about maybe not going away for college, how I could stay in Hawaii and take some classes, work part-time. She cut me off before I could finish. I could get into my school in the country, she said, if I just put in a little effort. Remember what that's like, effort. Damn it, Bar. You can't just sit around like some good time Charlie, waiting for luck to see you through. A good time what? A good time Charlie, a loafer. I looked at her sitting there, so earnest, so certain of her son's destiny. The idea that my survival depended on luck remained a heresy to her. She insisted on assigning responsibility somewhere, to herself, to Gramps, and to me. I suddenly felt like puncturing that certainty of hers, letting her know that her experiment with me had failed. Instead of shouting, I laughed. "A good time Charlie, huh? Well, why not? Maybe that's what I want out of life. I mean, look at Gramps. He didn't even go to college." The comparison caught my mother by surprise. Her face went slack. Her eyes wavered. It suddenly dawned on me her greatest fear. "Is that what you're worried about?" I asked. "That I'll end up like Gramps?" She shook her head quickly. "You're already much better educated than your grandfather," she said, but the certainty had finally drained from her voice. Instead of pushing the point, I stood up and left the room. Billy had stopped singing. The silence felt oppressive, and I suddenly felt very sober. I rose from the couch, flipped the record, drank what was left in my glass, poured myself another. Upstairs, I could hear someone flushing a toilet, walking across the room, another insomniac probably listening to his life tick away. That was the problem with booze and drugs, wasn't it? At some point, they couldn't stop the ticking sound, the sound of certain emptiness, and that, I suppose, is what I'd been trying to tell my mother that day, that her faith in justice and rationality was misplaced, that we couldn't overcome after all, that all the education and good intentions in the world couldn't help plug up the holes in the universe or give you the power to change its blind, mindless course.